Radio is the oldest medium. Well, it's not the oldest medium. Of course, print is the oldest medium. But I mean, people have been listening to radio for 80 years or so. It's a wildly popular way to get news and information. I grew up listening to radio because my dad worked for the BBC World Service, and Britain is a very radio culture. So I was completely used to getting my information through my ears. And again, public radio, I mean, it has millions and millions of listeners across the US. And I've been working in public radio for 10 years or so when I founded my own show. So for me, I mean, audio has always been my favorite medium, and I've never associated it with only people who have some kind of visual impairment wanting to listen to radio. I mean, clearly it's commercial radio, public radio. They're still thriving in many, many markets, even if more audio is going online and onto our phones so that we can listen on the go. So, yeah, I've always, I mean, I don't know the numbers, but I know that, again, the show I worked for years, Marketplace, and I still freelance for them, I mean, their numbers are way higher than TV business shows. So that just shows that many, many people are listening to radio, especially in their car when they're commuting to and from work. And Americans have some pretty long commutes. So, but to me, audio is the most intimate medium. When you're telling a story and it's just between, it'll just be me with my headphones in and somebody talking to me, or me in the kitchen listening to the radio and somebody is talking directly to me, or that's what it feels like. And that's what the best radio and podcasting should feel like. There's this intimacy that I don't think you get with video at all. I mean, I appreciate video, but I've never been interested in making video because to me, audio is so special and so intimate. The whole old media versus new media debate is absolutely raging in the radio world. I mean, specifically as regards radio versus podcasting, because there's a lot of concern that, especially with public radio, that the audiences are aging and they aren't being replaced by enough young listeners, which is why so many, huge outlets like NPR are getting into podcasting. I can't see radio going anywhere anytime soon, but I don't know if any of us have a clue what's going to happen to it. I mean, is the New York Times newspaper going to be around in physical form in 30 years? Many people still get that delivered, but I bet you those people they skew older. They skew probably 50s and above. So I don't know. The answer is I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't say if radio, terrestrial radio, which is my medium, is going to disappear. I would doubt it, but will it have a much smaller audience? Quite possibly, because people are going to be going on demand. They want what they want when they want it on their phone, so they can play it on the subway or in their car or when they're going for a walk, running errands, whatever it is they happen to do. I don't have so much of a take on newspapers because I haven't worked in newspapers. I've been largely a radio person. I think a lot of newspapers are in trouble as a physical newspaper, And then the question is, how do they survive digitally? Because advertisers don't pay as much for digital ads as they do for print ads. So that's a whole conversation that you'd need to have with a print person. But as regards radio and TV, it'll be really interesting when I'm, 75, which was 30 years from now, to look back and see what has transpired over the intervening 30 years. I'd be surprised if terrestrial radio, has shrunk massively. But I don't know. People are wrong about all sorts of things, aren't we? We're not very good at predicting the future.
Yeah, well, as far as radio goes, I'm 40 now. I was born in 1976. I mean, I think terrestrial radio will be around, but here's what I could see happening. I could maybe see the analog disappearing, and terrestrial radio will go all digital. I could see that happening, but I think there'll always be a need for terrestrial radio. Just like I don't think the regular on-air TV will go away either. It's just that I think one day, terrestrial radio as we know it, will be different, because what will happen is, unlike the TV stations, they'll get rid of the analog and go digital. Now for me, since I'm a DXer, I like the DX on AM. Yeah, that might put a damper on all that stuff. You may not be able to DX like you can now, but hey, what are you going to do? I've always liked radio ever since I was a little kid. I'm totally blind. I'm an amateur radio operator. So, radio is definitely the way to go. Especially when the Hurricane Sandy hit a couple years ago. More people listened to radio then than ever before. There was more people listening to radio. And, people don't realize, if these cell phone towers were to go down tomorrow or next week, guess what? Radio is the only way to communicate. Yeah, look at 9/11 when all the police and fire communications went out. The amateur radio operators were the ones that got people reunited with their families. So, I would encourage anybody out there, if you don't have an amateur radio license, I would encourage you to get one. Because if heaven forbid you're driving somewhere, you're out in the middle of nowhere, you get into an accident or your car breaks down and your cell phone don't work, you're pretty much screwed if you don't have two-way radio communications. And amateur radio will save your life. It's been proven. In fact, I could tell you a story. There was a story on 2020 one night. There was it was a husband, his wife and their son. And I forget where they were, but they were in a boat somewhere. And these pirates jumped aboard their ship and robbed their boat. And the kid, he jumped out because he wanted to try to swim away for safety. Well, kid got shot in the back. The thieves, they destroyed the VHF radio. But little did they know, there was an amateur radio aboard. Guy pulled out his amateur radio, turned it on. His wife asked him, hey, what do I do here? Guy said, you just key up and say break, break, break. And she keyed up and said break, break, break. And a guy came back to him. Luckily, one of the amateur radio operators was a doctor. And he told them what to do to stop the bleeding. The kid was in pretty bad shape. They got him to the hospital eventually when they got to land. But if it wouldn't have been for that ham radio, that kid would have been dead. He was he was hurt pretty bad when he got shot. But if it wasn't for that radio, that kid would have been gone. So, I would encourage anybody, please, if you can, if you're interested, become an amateur radio operator. Go to ARRL's website. Go to arnewsline.org, and you can listen to Amateur Radio Newsline. It's a news bulletin that tells you what's going on in the amateur radio world. And if you want to take the practice test, you go to it's called Practice Test Online. Practice Test Online. You can get your technician class license, which is your first license. Then, if you want to upgrade, you can get your general. That license will allow you to operate on the worldwide bands. And then if you get your extra class, which is what I have, that's the highest license you can get, you can operate all the amateur bands. So, yeah, radio is definitely the way to go, and I agree. I don't listen to TV except for one show I like, but I listen to radio most of the time. I have Sirius XM. I like the old-time radio shows. But, okay, I hear you, timer. Anyway, that's my perspective on it. But, yeah, I would encourage anybody out there, if you're interested, get your amateur radio license. You'll be glad you did it.
Hey, Ashley, like you, I don't know where this is going, but I do think content is king. And if you're producing radio, if it's relevant and interesting to people, I think it could be on various delivery platforms. Maybe it will be on terrestrial radio. Maybe it will be on demand, be fed on podcasts. People will be consuming it on their smartphones. I mean, NPR right now is having a huge internal debate about, do we promote the local stations? Do we promote the NPR One app? How do we do this? And yeah, it really matters where people are getting this content. If we promote the apps and things too much, are we driving people away from local stations? And I think you also see that to some degree with commercial radio stations right now too. Now, music is a very different animal, but I think for spoken word radio, content will always be king. And if you're producing radio or a part of that side of it, it's always going to be about doing something interesting that people are going to listen to. And there's no question that the demographics are troubling. The audience is continuing to get older. You know, I look at my situation. When I was growing up, I had a radio station, okay? There was a station in town I listened to, and they played the hit music, and I mean, they were my radio station, and my friends had a radio station. We might have different radio stations. We had a couple of stations where I grew up that were competing tooth and nail all the time for listeners, and both of them were top 40, and everybody kind of had a station. My son, who is 21, his generation, they really don't have a station. They have lots of social media, and they have music that they pull up on their phones and things, and they have Spotify, and they have Apple Music, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, music is a very different thing, but what concerns me about it is that, as I say, there was a time when radio was so personal, and so many people now, particularly younger people, they really don't have a station that they identify with. Of course, a lot of people don't have a television station that they identify with, and they really don't care if something is local or national, or if it comes from one of the big networks, or if it comes from one of the minor cable networks, or if it comes from Netflix or whatever. It all comes out of the same box. They make a couple of clicks and it appears on their TV screen. And I think that's pretty much going to be the way it is with radio. People don't really care so much, where it comes from or what the station is. I mean, people in the business really care about this, but I'm not sure that people who are listeners really care about it. Much in the same way years ago, and I know this analogy is a little bit tortured, but, nobody really knew or paid much attention to what label Michael Jackson was on or Elvis. I mean, nobody was loyal to RCA because Elvis was on RCA. They just liked Elvis. If Elvis had changed labels, and put out a new record, they'd be going to Elvis. And if CD became the new medium as opposed to albums, I mean, people were buying Elvis CDs, and then they were buying Elvis downloads. Now, Elvis is probably the wrong, because he is such an iconic figure from many, many years ago, that's probably the wrong example, but you get what I'm saying. The delivery systems change, but the quality of the content, if that stays strong, I think people will find it. And I think for people in spoken word radio, this is really scary, because what I think we have to realize is that if we don't find a way to really connect with younger people, they're gonna move away from us, because there's so many choices out there, and there's so many other ways that they can spend their discretionary time. So, I mean, I think we'll know who's successful and who's not by the number of people who are listening or downloading. And it's not as much broadcasting as it used to be. I think there's more narrowcasting now as podcasts and things come into play. But I think the quality of the content is always going to be the most important thing. And 30 years from now, man, I have no idea where it's going to go. The other question, though, that I think everybody's scared to death of is, how do we monetize this? Certainly in terrestrial radio, the underpinnings of advertising have have been rocked really hard here. And I don't know about public radio. I don't know. I don't know about their, their structure. I know they depend on a lot of donations and Corporation for Public Broadcasting and various other things. So I don't really know how their funding is going on. But clearly in commercial radio, they are really struggling as advertisers are finding other means and other mediums and other ways to reach people. And I have a friend who runs a successful entertainment venue, and he was advertising all the time on radio, but he complains now more and more. He says, radio stations want us to pay more and more, and the impact is less and less. And I think there's no question that radio has changed so significantly, and the underpinnings of advertising is really a concern.
Done. Single finger double tap to stop.
I'm of the same line of thought as Ashley, and the way I view radio, it's a medium that's so easily accessible. It's free, and I would even argue that it's even more accessible now with the availability of so many radio stations by way of the internet. And of course, not just for the sake of listening to music, but the sheer number of stations which offer talk radio. And I love listening to talk radio. Admittedly, I don't listen to it as frequently as I used to, due to time limitations. I just don't have as much time now with my working and going to school, and I'm not able to listen to talk radio as much. But certainly during my undergraduate years, I would listen to it fairly frequently, and it's just a great way to get the opinions of a variety of people and learn. I hear things all the time when I listen to talk radio. I learn about current events. I learn about science stories, and just a whole wealth of things that you can get from listening to radio. So, while it might seem in today's environment with technology that radio is going extinct, but I disagree with that notion. And it's all due entirely because of the internet. People put together podcasts. Organizations use podcasts to tell their stories, to have opinion of a host and the listeners, and it's just more prevalent now. It's becoming more prevalent. People have access to it by way of their smartphones, on their computers. It's everywhere, and I think it's a great thing.
No, terrestrial radio will not disappear. I loved radio since I was a child. And, what's always attractive to me is, honestly, I like hearing some static in my signal. I like hearing some discrepancies in my signal. Excuse me. And the thing is, excuse me again. That thing is with the discrepancies, like I'm listening to Family's radio right now. Their transmitters distort sometimes. Alright? But the radio I normally listen to actually is shortwave radio. We've lost a lot of shortwave stations. But they've opened the door to pirate stations to get on the air, like clandestine broadcasters. So I listen to a lot of shortwave. There's absolutely no way the terrestrial radio is going to go away quickly. No way. In the next 50 years, it'll still be here.
I think shortwave radio is still going to be here in the next 50 years too. But, I always loved radio since I was a kid. So when I saw this question, I'm like, oh yeah, I have to answer this one. So, and I do think people's going to be getting the New York Times and stuff in physical form in the next 30 years. I think that's going to be kind of like radio. I don't think anyone's really going to. I mean, I don't think. I don't think a company's going to stop with their physical forms, because I think there's going to be some people that still just hang on to the old ways. And even if people like the New York Times do stop, there's going to be other newspapers that'll kind of spring up for the physical format. I think other people are going to gravitate to it. That's my opinion, but I could absolutely be wrong. But anyway, this is KC3CDV, James in Pennsylvania, saying, may the good Lord Jesus Christ bless you.
Radio has been around for a long time, and that's the way people found entertainment for a while before television, or even when it was too expensive to buy a television, you could buy a radio for, much cheaper. And, I find radio more entertaining than television, honestly. I have some vision, but to watch television, there's nothing good on television anymore. And if there, with television shows, there's a lot of, so much emphasis on showing off and glamour and, shiny things. And it's so emphasized on seeing nowadays. Or visual aspects, maybe not seeing, visual aspects, it takes away from the beauty of entertainment. And when you listen to radio, you don't have to worry about, oh, what does this person always look like? Or, what clothes are they wearing? Or are they fat? Are they skinny? You don't need to worry about all the visual aspects. You can create your own image. If you're listening to like a radio drama, for example, BBC 4, or, some old-time podcasts, with old-time radio. Yes, there's sound in the background, but you can also imagine yourself what everything looks like with the sounds and the voices. I love those type of radio, especially, like I said, BBC 4. I love listening to the radio dramas. I think you can get so much more out of listening to those things. And even if it's not a radio drama, for example, just listening to news on the radio, or, programs, I think you get a lot more out of it because you're not watching and relying heavily on visual aspects to, tone out what someone's saying. You actually have to listen to what the person's saying in order to get the gist of what's happening or what program it is. So I really like it, and not just because, you can get radio anywhere now, but just for the fact, for me, it's much more entertaining and it's much more beneficial for me. I get a lot more, I get more use of my time and my energy when I listen. I find it better spent if I listen to something useful, or, entertain myself on whatever, doing house chores, or because that's the thing, with radio, you don't have to sit there and watch everything that's going on. You can just listen while you do whatever you need to do, whether it's cleaning or going for a walk. So it's radio is really I just love it, for all the reasons I mentioned.
I still love radio. ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, Singapore's 93.8 Live, CRI, China Radio International, a lot of There's a lot of good radio still out there.
Hello, my name is Shelley, and feel free to use this if you would like to. I absolutely love radio, and I feel if we think about radio and think about it being the first invention that was able to really transmit news quickly, besides a telegraph service, who's going to have a telegraph in your home? Radios, even back in the day, were a coveted thing. But if you had a radio, you could listen to some great music. You could hear the news going on. You could hear what the president was up to. You could, when they started doing sports, and of course, old-time radio, popular radio shows, which really, if one thinks about it, at least here in the U.S., we had radio shows that were dramatized into the 80s. If we think about the CBS Radio Mystery Theater, which was something I listened to as a child quite often, that was a treat for me. I made a deal with my folks, if I took a nap and I didn't give you a problem about school, can I listen to the CBS Radio Mystery Theater? Sometimes they would have reruns of old-time radio that were awesome. I love radio in the fact that when I listen to sporting events, even now sometimes I choose radio over the television. They have to be more descriptive. They have to, folks in radio, when they do on-location things or they're talking about the news, they have to paint an audio picture for individuals. And because it's all in your head, you have to imagine. And for a lot of people that are blind, that's the way it is for them. They have to imagine things. So a sporting event, while a TV might, let's give an example of a hockey game. While the TV, if somebody is sighted, is watching, they'll see that goal scored first, or if you're even listening. The problem with TV, they'll start chatting on about something else that is not relevant. Oh, well, John Smith, he had 85 goals last year, and, his wife just had a baby, and, all of a sudden somebody scored, and you don't know what the action was. Baseball, love to hear baseball games on the radio. Sometimes football. Loved getting the new music of the day on the radio. When radio was good, when there wasn't some guru telling you need to play as many songs in the hour, and you need to play these songs 35 times per day. Radio has changed so much, but the internal meaning of radio really hasn't. That's still to provide information, to set a scene, to paint a picture. I think more of the changes have occurred musically. And of course, now we have our iPhones. They can alert us about news. But, if your iPhone runs out of batteries, or there's a power outage, or there's emergency information, we might get that in the iPhone, and we should always have our devices charged. But I'm always going to have a radio in the house with batteries. It's always going to be my go-to. Even on the internet, I have radio apps to find different radio stations and hear what's going on in different parts of the country and sometimes in parts of the world. But there's nothing quite like being able to have a dial, or now there's digital, scanning that you can do. Nothing like skimming up and down the dial and seeing about radio. Talk radio, that's a big thing that's evolved now. I don't remember it as much back in the day, but now we have all kinds of talk radio and the political pundits and people being able to call in and express their opinions. And I remember some local talk radio, but now we have all these syndicated things. Now we can call somebody and be judged. Oh, I'm sorry. Helped by a radio therapist. We had Dr. Ruth back in the 80s. I think you need to see a therapist. We have still, we have Rush, and we have Dr. Laura, and I don't think we have her anymore. We used to have Dr. Joy Brown here in the States. She was quite good as a therapist. She was kind, but she would tell you like it was, whereas Dr. Laura was just, I thought, plain mean. So there are many different facets of radio that I still quite enjoy. Now we have the satellite radio, and you have a little bit more variety with that than some of your terrestrial. So even though it's involved, I still adore radio. It has always been a large part of my life, from the little transistor portable radios and radios shaped like teddy bears and ducks that I've owned. And then, of course, like the radio, AM, FM radio tape recorders that they had out. Radio has just always been a big part of my life. And I think a lot of folks out here would agree when they say that radio, while it's changed, is still pretty significant. That may be a sweeping statement, but at least for this woman in her early 50s, it certainly was and still is.
Do you know, I've been thinking about this on and off over the last few years since I mean, I kind of lost some my useful vision about 7-8 years ago, so I could no longer really make out the TV screen. And then along came audio description, and it made listening to the telly so much more accessible. Because I think audio description is fantastic, but it makes me think that I don't particularly love radio, although I think everybody has one. Everybody will listen to it at some point during the week, and I've always got it on, especially in the mornings, as you might be able to hear now, for company to get my day started. But wouldn't say I'm particularly fan. It's just one of those. It's just an option to use, and since I've not been able to kind of work out pictures on the screen of the television, then I kind of find myself listening to programs that don't necessarily need picture, and it makes me think that there are an awful lot of programs that we see on the TV or that are on the television that would work equally on the radio. But I just think that because television has taken over predominantly since the 60s and 70s, then we've moved away from radio in favour of the television. But when you're watching programs like the news and the breakfast TV and things, it's not really necessary to be looking at a picture, I find. And I've realised this since I've lost my sight, that I listen to these programs that don't need me to understand what I'm looking at. So documentaries, for example, is a great one, because specialist news programs like Panorama and Channel 4's Dispatches, I mean, these are UK TV programs, but they're news focused, and they don't need to be on the television. But like I say, I think because we're all so used to, we've put that in front of the radio, that all these programs are aired on TV that needn't be. I mean, we've got BBC Radio 4 here, and I've been enjoying that more than I don't think I ever used to listen to Radio 4 10 years ago. But there's some fascinating programs on there, and programs that have gone from radio to TV because they've been so successful. And I think that should be the other way around. I mean, there's a famous program in the UK called Little Britain with David Walliams and I forget the other guy's name now, escapes me. But they started out on the radio, moved to BBC Three, and then all of a sudden BBC One. You know, so they've kind of taken a program off the radio and put it on the television. But I think that equally works the other way around. There's a news like a comedy satire that I listen to on Radio 4 called The News Quiz on a Friday evening, early evening, and that reminds me so much of a program that's on the television called Have I Got More News for You, and they are very identical, and equally both could work well on the radio. So I think we put too much emphasis on television because we need to be kind of fixated with we're too visual, I think. Yeah. Anyway, I won't dribble on, but that's my my opinion on it all. Really, hope that made sense.
Well, good evening. Yeah, I'm a fan of radio. I particularly like the BBC's dramatizations. The people who write books have to be wordsmiths, and the people who write for radio have to be real artists because they have to create the images in your brain. Now, the truth is, if you write for television, well, you have eye candy there. If you write for radio, you have to create everything. I believe one of the audio Doctor Who's, Sylvester McCoy, who was actually a Doctor Who, said that the audio adventures of Doctor Who had the best sets in the world because they were in your head. I'm paraphrasing, but the point is that it can be whatever it has to be. The sets are whatever you imagine them to be. The people have to get the images in your head, so it's a very creative medium, and I think we're very fortunate that the BBC has been bankrolled so it can create a lot of very interesting, radio productions, the dramatizations, and so forth that may not have made it in this country here in America because there wasn't the commercial push for it. Public radio does some of that, but not nearly enough, and so most Americans really haven't heard. Their idea of radio dramatizations is the 30s and 40s stuff. Fortunately, the BBC has much more modern things. And of course, now Audible is doing some of that as well. But Big Finish, which did a lot of stuff for the BBC, is now selling stuff online. So it's about, I think, maybe $10 for a production or whatever for a show. It's worth considering because they have to, all these things are written especially for radio. There's no pictures now, especially here on Varel with regards to people who are blind. They're not missing anything. They're getting it the same way everyone else is. So I think that really makes it a very important means of entertainment and something that people who can see and not see can enjoy. I hope the creative dramatizations, which are done for Audible, which are done, various organizations like Big Finish. I think there's another one out there as well. I hope they continue because radio has a long way to go, and it can be very, very, it just encourages and fosters creativity. At least that's my opinion. Have a nice day.
Well, right now, I do listen some radio as well because radio, even the internet, is very good right now. The internet is quite good. We can get many information from Facebook, from Twitter, from all over the places. But radio still have its, features that we can have the basic instant news things. So it's a very basic, way to know what happened around the world and things like that. And it is very instant because we have news program every 30 minutes or every 1 hour, things like that. So we can get the instant information from outside the world. So it's very good. And things like that. So yeah, that's my answer.
I think my attitude toward radio has changed over the years, but back when I was younger, even when I was a kid, before I really got interested in music, I think programming was more interesting and more individualized to the person presenting it, and people were more prone to playing unusual things if they wanted, at least in some cases. As radio became more corporate and more consolidated and so forth, it became a lot more predictable and a lot more homogenized and a lot less interesting. I am a fan of the old-time radio shows, the dramas, comedies, and other shows from the
30s, 40s, 50s, and, well, early 60s, I guess, and some of the stuff after that were meant to be revivals of that sort of thing. I have always liked, when I traveled, taking a radio with me and scanning the bands just to see what radio sounded like in the area I was passing through, especially small towns. Sometimes that radio can be interesting if it is locally originated. Nowadays it's easy to set up a local station and pretty much have everything brought in via satellite except for the local commercials. But there was a time when small town radio was kind of interesting, had interesting kind of unique color to it. Nowadays, I'm really more interested in things maybe like format flips and, like I said, checking out radio from different areas. I do a lot more listening to radio on the internet than I do on actual radios, although I have several, just in case. But I like to check out stations from other parts of the world that might do things a little differently or play music that you don't hear. In the U.S., I still like non-commercial radio. There's still some adventure in there with a lot of college radio. But commercial radio, it's gotten really, really dull, unfortunately. It's too bad. And then, of course, there's internet radio, and that seems to be a popular hobby amongst blind folks who have aspirations to being DJs but can't be hired at a standard radio station, so they'll go on the internet with various pieces of software and so forth. I did a little teeny tiny bit of that myself, but I think internet radio can be interesting too, depending on how creative and interesting the particular people want to be.
Hello, Ashley. I couldn't agree with you more about how radio is a personal, intimate medium, because I have done dozens of radio and podcast show interviews, and I coach people on doing interviews, and one of the things I tell them is it doesn't matter how many people are listening, either now or in the archives later. It's just a conversation between 2 or 3 or 4 people, depending on, sometimes it's one-on-one and sometimes it's a panel. But in general, it's usually you and the host, and you have 15 or 30 minutes, or in some cases up to 2 hours, and you can talk about whatever moves you. You can go wherever the conversation takes you. You can tell stories. You can go deep into your background. You can share things that inspire, motivate, and encourage other people. You can give out actual information instead of having to condense your answers and where you have 3 minutes or 4 minutes, or if you're really lucky, maybe 15 minutes. You have the time to really let people get to know who you are and who your guest is, and to have a conversation. And so I agree with you. I really love radio. I am actively working to get some more TV interviews, because TV it's just one of those things I haven't been able to do much of, and anything that's a struggle for me, anything where it's not going like I think it should be going, that's generally where I focus. So even though I've done over 100 radio and podcast interviews, I want to do more TV. So far I've done one actual in-studio TV interview, and that was back in December while I was in New York City as one of this year's Amtrak Writers in Residence. So I look forward to hearing more from you, and I'd love to know the name of your show and where I can find it. And just hope you have a great week. Oh, by the way, I do love your accent. I am totally blind. And I wonder if your parents exposed you to old-time radio and what you think of it, because I really enjoy, appreciate, and love what is generally referred to as the theater of the mind, the old-time radio, the golden age of 30s, 40s, and 50s. All right, thanks again. Take care. This is Maxwell Ivy, theblindblogger.net.
I'm of the same line of thought as Ashley, and the way I view radio, it's a medium that's so easily accessible. It's free, and I would even argue that it's even more accessible now with the availability of so many radio stations by way of the internet. And of course, not just for the sake of listening to music, but the sheer number of stations which offer talk radio. And I love listening to talk radio. Admittedly, I don't listen to it as frequently as I used to, due to time limitations. I just don't have as much time now with my working and going to school, and I'm not able to listen to talk radio as much. But certainly during my undergraduate years, I would listen to it fairly frequently, and it's just a great way to get the opinions of a variety of people and learn. I hear things all the time when I listen to talk radio. I learn about current events. I learn about science stories, and just a whole wealth of things that you can get from listening to radio. So, while it might seem in today's environment with technology that radio is going extinct, but I disagree with that notion. And it's all due entirely because of the internet. People put together podcasts. Organizations use podcasts to tell their stories, to have opinion of a host and the listeners, and it's just more prevalent now. It's becoming more prevalent. People have access to it by way of their smartphones, on their computers. It's everywhere, and I think it's a great thing.